Okay. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us. We'll get started in just a few minutes. If you want, while you're waiting, you can put in the chat where you're tuning in from. Oh, wow. Okay, we got Rockville. We got a couple people on campus in College Park. And Arlington, Virginia, welcome. California, welcome, Helen. That's amazing. Vienna, Virginia. Thanks, Matt.
Hello, everyone. I'd like to welcome you all to our book talk hosted by both the Alumni Association and the Student Alumni Leadership Council, otherwise known as SALC. This is the first time we have ever done this event, so we're very lucky and excited to have Amy with us here tonight. To briefly introduce myself, my name is Marika Dubai. I am a senior double majoring in business management and German studies, and am a member of the Student Alumni Leadership Council, otherwise known as SALC. For those wondering what SALC is, it is a branch of student ambassadors that work with the university's Alumni Association in efforts to connect students, alumni, and donors. As a student organization, we host several events throughout the year, similar to this one, to develop an awareness of the alumni community, enhance school spirit and traditions, and to instill a culture of giving back. You may have been a part of our other events, such as Trips Under 30, or are making your way through the UMD bucket list to collect a pin at our next pin pickup station. To learn more about SALC, feel free to check us out on Instagram at UMDSALC. Now, to dive into tonight's event, this event will be moderated by one of our very own SALC members, Kelly Tang. Kelly is a senior studying philosophy, politics, and economics, and is a fellow member of SALC. After the moderated portion of the event, we will have a Q&A session, so please hold off on questions until then. If you want, you can certainly drop your questions in the chat as you think of them, and we'll remember to visit them during the Q&A. Also, please be sure that you're muted if you are not speaking. In addition, at the end of the webinar, Amy has graciously offered to give away a few copies of her book. In order to be eligible, please stay online through the end of the event, and we will randomly select the winners. I'd like to now pass it over to Kelly for the remainder of the event. Take it away, Kelly.
Thanks, Marika. Hi, guys. I'm excited to moderate tonight's webinar, and I'm even more excited to introduce our featured speaker, author, and UMD alumna, Amy Yip. Amy Yip is a class of 2004 alumna and received her degrees in both computer science and communications from the University of Maryland. She also received her MBA from the UCLA Anderson School of Management. Amy Yip is a somatic life transformation and mental fitness coach, keynote speaker, author, and self-confidence trainer. She works with women of color leaders to strengthen their mental fitness, heal intergenerational wounds, find their voice and courage to speak up, and have agency to let go of all their shoulds so that they can be the authors of their own life stories. Her mission is to empower AAPI women to be seen and to be heard. I myself am the daughter of Taiwanese immigrants, so I'm especially looking forward to hearing from her tonight. Currently, Amy resides in Maryland with Greg, her best friend and husband, and her son, Logan. Please join me in welcoming Amy Yip.
Thank you. Thank you for having me, everyone.
All right, so we're going to go into our moderated portion of the panel. And I just want to say I found your book very relatable when I read it. And I really like the way you broke down the book into sections with like myths. I found that particularly interesting. So the first question I have for you today is, what inspired you to write Unfinished Business and delve into the topic of relationships between adult children and their immigrant parents?
Yeah. So I am a coach and I work a lot with women of color, especially in the Asian community. And it was maybe like 3 years ago that I was working with a Chinese American woman, 55-year-old senior vice president at one of the largest banks in America, super successful. And she came to me because she was trying to figure out, what do I want to do next in my career? I don't like what I'm doing, but I'm not sure what that next thing is. During our coaching work, she realized that she wanted to do something creative and she wanted to start her own business. And as we continued exploring that, she said, oh, but Amy, I'm going to have to wait to do this thing I've got to wait until my dad passes away. And mind you, her father at the time was 55-year-old, right? And when I asked her, well, what makes you believe that? She said, well, because when I became senior vice president, he had said, great, and the next thing you're going to be is president. And he has these expectations for me. And when we tried to explore, could she have conversations with her father and share her dreams and her passions and what she wants to do next? She said, I go into little girl mode around my father. And when that comes up, I am just so afraid. I am afraid of his disapproval, of his disappointment, of his criticisms. And I just don't want to have these conversations. And I started seeing this pattern among a lot of my clients who were children of immigrants. And where they would just go into little girl, little boy mode, or they would just lie to their parents. So they would go into these modes and they would decide, you know what, I'm not going to pursue the thing I want to pursue, or they would decide they were going to lie and not, and pursue it, but just not tell their parents. And I started sitting back and wondering, well, what are the stories that I have about my parents? What are the things that I'm lying to them or withholding the truth, or maybe not pursuing because I'm afraid of disappointing them? And when I sat down, there were just all these stories that I had. I realized that I had all these stories that were impacting what I chose to do and how I chose to show up in the world. Everything from my success will never be good enough for my parents to I didn't marry a good Chinese boy as they had expected, so they're disappointed in me, to I will never be able to repay my parents for their sacrifices. And so when I realized I had all these things happening, all these stories, I decided that I wanted to learn more about my parents and hear the truth. And a big reason was actually, this was amidst COVID, and my parents are older. Their health is not great. So if they were to catch COVID, I didn't know what would happen. And the second thing was, there was a rise in AAPI hate crimes at the time. And all the people I saw getting attacked they looked like my parents. And so there was this fear of what's going to happen. And am I going to get another chance to ask them for the truth and really learn about their life story? So at the time I was stuck overseas in Ghana, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to WhatsApp my dad and see what he says. So I WhatsApped him, and he responded with, oh, but I don't have anything interesting to tell you. I'm just a restaurant worker, right? Like, my life isn't interesting. And you should talk to your uncle. Your uncle was a lawyer. He's got interesting stories, I'm sure. And that kind of just shows how my dad views what is worthy and what is not. But I was able to persuade him that his story matters, that I want to learn about him. And that started the journey of learning about his life and learning about him and his mom, him and my mom and their journey. So over the last 3 years, I've been in 40 plus hours of conversation with my parents. And if you read the book, it's going to sound like these conversations were easy. And I promise you they were not. Because if I were to include all of those difficult conversations, the book would be like this thick, right? But the first 25 hours were super hard, lots of big emotions. I wanted to give up many, many times. And now on the other end of it, I know what's possible if you persist and keep trying, because my relationship with my parents has completely shifted. And so the book is really my hope that more people will embark on this journey. Every chapter is framed around one of the myths or the stories that I had, and I share my side of the story, I share my parents' story, and then at the end of that chapter, there's something I call a date with your parents, where I encourage the reader to go on a date with their parents. There are self-reflective prompts, there are questions for the reader to ask their own parents.
That's very inspiring. I'm sure taking that initial step was the hardest part. So, and my next question for you is, throughout your book, you mentioned the weight of high expectations and unspoken obligations from immigrant parents. How did these experiences shape your own life and choices?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier, I saw this pattern in all my clients where they would either pursue their dream and lie to their parents, or they would say, oh, I'm going to wait until my parents pass away, so then I'll pursue my dreams and do the thing I've always wanted. And so this was definitely true for me. I had always had this dream to go travel the world, quit my corporate job, travel, volunteer. And I did do that in January of 2020. I left corporate America, quit my job at Google, and went and I traveled. The thing is, I lied to my parents about it. When I first had this idea to do this thing, I decided I'm not going to tell them that I'm going to quit my job at Google. I'm not going to tell them I'm going to do this thing, because they're not going to understand. They're just going to criticize. So I decided I'm going to tell my parents I got a prestigious, difficult to get job overseas. It's great for my career, right? It's going to help me tremendously. And I created an FAQ document for my sisters to answer my parents' questions. And I had this whole plan. I'm going to block them from social media, block all their friends. Like, nobody's going to know. And I told my parents this. And of course, they're proud, because it's like this hard to get thing, good for my career. And then my sister told on me. And that's the only reason I was honest with them. And so they ended up finding out. But I think that's how all these expectations that my parents had impacted me. Like, I would do exactly what I saw all my clients do, either lie, or I would say, oh, I will wait to pursue my dream, and I double majored at University of Maryland. And that was a big, big pressure from my parents. They wanted me to be doctor, lawyer, engineer. And I had a passion for communications, for marketing, for the creative side, right? So I double majored. I was computer science and I was public relations. So it was my way of, how do I live and pursue the thing that I want to do while still appeasing them. But throughout my life, when I made choices, I was always filled with this tremendous guilt of, well, if I pursue the thing I want, then I'm disappointing them and I've let them down. But then if I do pursue the thing they want, I'm unhappy. And so there is always this internal battle.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I actually know a lot of children of immigrants in my grade or in college that have two majors, but one of them is like their own major for fun, and then one of them is to please their parents. So it's really interesting to hear that you did that as well.
Yeah.
And I know you mentioned before that all these conversations you had with your parents took a lot of big emotions. It was very difficult. Do you find that your relationship with your parents have changed throughout the process of writing this book and maybe after it? And were there any surprises or revelations that occurred during the process of engaging in these conversations with your parents?
Yeah, I'll start with the latter question. The thing that surprised me most is this realization that all of our parents are human beings just like all of us. They have hopes, they have dreams, they have fears. They want to be loved and they want to be accepted and belong just like we do. And I have never seen my father cry in all my 42 years, never seen him cry. And it was in one of the conversations when I asked him about emotions and why in our culture we're taught you shouldn't cry, especially men, you have to be this tough man. And I asked him, did you ever see grandpa cry? And so he started talking about his childhood and how my grandfather teared up. And then my dad started tearing up, and I've never seen him tear up. And of course, my mom's there, and she's like, "Old man, are you crying?" And he's like, "No, I'm not." And he was trying to hide his tears. And I just ran up to him and just gave him a hug. And that unleashed all these tears that had probably been building up, and he's been like holding in all his life. And so all these tears just released, and he just let himself cry, and I just hugged him. And then my mom came and hugged, and it was one of the most endearing moments because I've never experienced that, where it's like the three of us hugging and my dad's crying, right? Just the emotions. And so I just started realizing how human all of our parents are. And in terms of our relationship today, it has completely shifted. And I have two stories to showcase how it's changed. So for one, I'm a speaker. And when I first started speaking, my dad used to say to me, "Who would pay you to speak? I'd pay you to shut up." Right? Said in a very loving way, sort of. I mean, he said it jokingly, but still, when your parents say that to you, it kind of burns. And you're like, oh, you don't really believe in me. And so a few months ago, I went to go speak in Austin, and my dad dropped me off at the airport. And it was 6 a.m. And I said, "It's so early. I appreciate you dropping me off. You must be tired. Go home, get some sleep." And he looks at me and says, "Seeing my daughter go do her thing gives me energy, and I'm not tired." And I was like, right. It was just so heartwarming. I'm like, oh, he actually believes in what I'm doing. And then the other example I'll give is I have been going through fertility treatments to try to have a second child. In May, I had a failed embryo transfer. And for those who know about fertility treatments and things, it's very emotional. You're pumping yourself full of hormones, and then to have it not work is very, very emotional and disappointing. And my dad called me and he said, "Hey, how's it going? How are you feeling? When do you find out?" And I already found out at that point. And my body, when he asked that, immediately went into fight, flight, freeze. It was just like, ugh, and it clenched up. And it's because my sister had a miscarriage like around 8 years ago. And when she had a miscarriage, they essentially blamed her. They said, "You must have done something to cause this miscarriage." And after finding out my embryo transfer was unsuccessful, I'm already emotional. I'm already, not feeling great. So I don't want to be blamed for it even further. That just doesn't help. And that's why I went into this like clenching, oh my gosh, I don't know if I should tell the truth. And a part of me wanted to lie. I wanted to be like, oh, I don't know yet. And, I'll find out later, to try to just push that off. But then I thought about my book. I thought about the journey. I thought about my message to people that are reading the book. And I was like, okay, if I'm telling people that they need to be open to their parents, then I need to do the same. So I said, you know what? It was unsuccessful. There's no baby. And I was like ready and bracing for whatever my dad was going to say. And I thought he was going to criticize. And instead he goes, "Amy, fate is a funny thing. Sometimes things work out and sometimes they don't. Don't blame yourself." And my jaw dropped. I was like, who is this man? What did you do with my father? And then my mom picks up, because they still have a landline. And so my mom picks up on the phone, and she said to me, "Oh, are you crying? Don't cry. Don't be upset. It'll be okay. I'll bring you some food. Are you hungry?" Right. And again, my jaw drops, and I was like, what did these two people do with my parents? Because I don't know who they are, but in a good way. And so these stories, they're not in the book because I'm still seeing some of the transformations and the shifts in our relationship, like after the book got published. And so it's still amazing the things that my parents are saying and doing, because I'm like, I don't really know them, but I'm pleasantly surprised by how they show up.
Mhm. Thank you so much for sharing this story. Yeah. My dad also used to say, I'll give you $5 to be quiet for 5 minutes. And I never saw those $5. So
You should ask him for it. Be like, hello.
yeah. So throughout the book, again, it's broken into these myths, right? So I particularly found the one about saving money in a relationship with money and being thrifty, like very, very relatable. Could you highlight maybe one or two specific stories or anecdotes from the book that you feel are particularly powerful or representative of the overall message you want to convey?
Yeah. So one of the stories was the notion of the sense of belonging. And throughout my life, I felt like I was on this pendulum, right? Like swaying from wanting to fit into America and not be seen as Asian, and being just upset of like how my parents speak, and wanting my parents to speak better English and not having that accent, and then swinging the other way. So being ashamed to being proud of being Asian. And it's like I swing back and forth, and it's almost like, well, in America I feel like I don't belong because people look at me and they're like, okay, where are you really from? And I'm like, I was born here. And then I go to China to visit and they look at me and they're like, well, you're not American, you have freckles, and so I feel like I just don't belong. And growing up, I always heard my parents talk about how I have to be connected to my culture of being Chinese. So I had always thought they would feel their sense of belonging and connection to China. And it was so shocking because when I asked my parents, where do you think you belong? My dad said, the moment I landed in America, I became American, and nobody has a right to tell me that I don't belong. And we started talking about belonging and the race and racism and things that are happening in America. And my dad, which it still sticks with me, he said, everybody has to make that choice. Nobody can tell you that you don't belong. And the thing is, no matter where you are in the world, people are going to tell you that you don't belong, right? Because him growing up in China, that happened, right? Shanghainese people would tell the villagers that they're better and you don't belong in Shanghai, and he's like, it happens everywhere. And so being here, you have to make that choice. Do I belong here? Do I want to belong here? And then commit to it, like a marriage, right? Commit to being here, vote, get involved, give back. And it's like this marriage where you have to be committed. And the other thing that he told me, which really has stuck with me also, is that it's not just about Asians doing better. It's not just about supporting Asians, but it is about everybody. And in order for us as individuals, as a country, as a world, if we want to make this a better place, it has to be everyone doing well, and it has to be us loving, being kind to each other all the time and treating each other like neighbors. And my parents were telling me about our neighbors where, the Chinese family, they were working on their yard, and then the Mexican family comes and like asks, do you want a shovel, and gives them a shovel. And then their white neighbors come over and they're like, oh, do you need help? And they started helping. And it was like, all of a sudden, everyone from the neighborhood is in this one yard helping them. And my dad's like, that's what we need to do more of, is how do we come together as humanity in kindness, and really, really help each other. And that's really stuck with me. And I'll say the last thing is my parents shared that, the reason they pushed me to go be a doctor, lawyer, engineer is because that's all they knew. And I feel like that's a theme throughout my book, where they did their best with what they knew, right? My dad had basically said they're uneducated. And so what they knew to be financially stable and to give safety and security is being a doctor, lawyer, engineer. And they didn't know that one day you could sell books, my dad says, on the line, and it would be Amazon, and he's like, who knew that this would be a possibility one day? And now that we know that you could sell books on the line via Amazon, like, go do other things. You don't have to be a doctor, lawyer, engineer. And so take our advice from way back when with a grain of salt, and know that we only had limited information. So with your current information, what advice do you want to take with you, and what do you want to leave behind? And that is something that you kids have to decide, because we don't know very much about like the world today. So those things really, really stuck with me, and are this these consistent messages throughout the book.
Yeah, thank you so much for that answer. And to all our readers on this chat right now, throughout the book, there's a lot of nuggets of wisdom from Papa Yip like that. And I particularly enjoyed the Chinese proverbs in each chapter. Those are also very, very helpful. So some of our readers may be apprehensive about starting conversations with their parents due to strained relationships. And I know you've included a tip sheet and suggested questions for engaging in meaningful conversation with parents. What other advice would you give to readers who are interested in embarking on this journey of meaningful dialogue with their parents?
Yeah, I'll give 3 tips. So the first tip is start with why.
Mhm.
Why do you want to embark on this journey? What's the difference that you want in your relationship with your parents? How do you want that to change and transform? Because the journey is difficult. I won't say it's easy. And there were many times when I wanted to give up. And what kept me going is having that why. Like, why am I doing this to begin with? The second thing is go in with the intention to understand your parents, not to change them, not to have them understand you. If you think about the last time someone tried to change you or force you to like transform or do something differently, how did you respond? And I think most of us resist when someone tries to change us, right? And so our parents will do the same. If they know that we're just trying to change them or we just want them to understand us, they're going to resist. So go in with that intention of, I just want to understand you. I want to learn about your experiences, right? And the third thing is don't give up. It took me 40 plus hours over the course of 3 years. It's not just a one and done. And even now in my relationship with my parents, it's this continued journey. And so, be persistent and don't give up.
Mm-hmm. And what tips do you have for readers whose parents might no longer be here?
If your parents are no longer here, learn from what you do have available. So that could look like, do you have aunts and uncles or friends of your parents who are still around that you can ask stories? So it's almost like puzzle piecing it together. What are the different stories, the different things that you can learn? Maybe your parents kept a diary or a journal, but what are those little pieces that you can piece together to try to put yourself into their shoes and learn from what you have around and access to?
Mm-hmm. That's very valuable advice. Thank you.
Yeah.
And in your view, what are the key benefits or rewards of embracing the unfinished business and forging a deeper bond with our parents? How can this process positively impact our lives and personal growth?
Yeah. So I've been studying a lot on intergenerational trauma. And for those who don't know what intergenerational trauma is, it is essentially trauma that gets passed from generation to generation. And the research has shown that it can be passed genetically, so biologically, it could be passed. It could also be passed through the environment. So they've done research on like Holocaust survivors, and they've been able to see that people who have survived it, like their children, their grandchildren have a different cortisol level. And so it's essentially changed biologically, but it's also how do we adapt to the environment? And when trauma happens, we find ways to adapt to the environment and how we show up in the world. And that impacts how the environment we're creating for our children. And then they learn how to survive and it continues to be passed down. And the thing is that the research is also showing that one of the ways to break that cycle is to build family bonds, to learn about what's happened in your family history, to learn and understand the trauma that's been in your family history, right? Through conversations. And I actually learned about this after I wrote the book. I was like, oh, so that's what I was doing. I didn't even know about it. But, a big motivator for me to have finished this book and to finish this journey, or not even finished, because I think it's never finished. It's a continuation. But what really motivated me to keep going was I had a kid during the process, and I don't want to pass my stuff onto him. He's half white, half Chinese, and he's going to have to deal with his own stuff with belonging. And I wanted him to not have to carry the things. And so I think that's one of the biggest benefits is how do you stop stuff from being passed from generation to generation to generation, right? And for our kids, for the future, like how do we stop that and give them a different experience?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Wow. Sounds like I'm gonna have to call my parents tonight. Yeah. And then the last question I have for you for now is, how do you hope Unfinished Business will impact readers and their relationships with their parents? And what do you ultimately want readers to take away from the book?
Yeah. Through this journey, I saw the humanity in my parents, and I saw not just our relationship healing, but I saw how they have transformed as individuals. And like my father he's pre-diabetic, and I couldn't even get him to go on walks, couldn't get him to go outside. And now he swims every day. And over here in Maryland, like it's wintertime, and during the summer it was a little easier because he's got this community pool in his backyard. But once winter hit, he actually said to me, "Hey, can you find me an indoor pool so that I could keep swimming?" And I was like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah." So something in him shifted, right? I don't know what. And then with my mom, I used to wonder, why is she so serious all the time? Right. And what I realized during our conversations is that in fourth grade, she was pulled out of school. So she never had much of a childhood. She started working when she was in fourth grade. And so throughout childhood, I was like, why is she so serious? Why doesn't she know how to be silly and be playful? And now, after these conversations, it's like something shifted. She jokes once in a while. It's not a lot, but it's a lot more than she used to. And so I would like to believe that something happened, and likely it's me giving them the gift of just someone listening. And how many of us have that, where we have people that just listen to us with no intention to fix, to solve, to change us, like nothing but to just listen. And very few of us have that. And so I would like to think that the gift I gave them was that. And I hope that, not only can all of our relationships with our parents shift, but that our parents will heal in many ways. And then also we will heal and allow us to really pursue our own dreams without feeling like I can't talk to my parents about what I really want to do, or I've got a double major in, one thing because my parents want me to, and I hate it, but like really do the thing that gives me joy because I really want to, and have that confidence that your parents will support you.
Yeah. It's fantastic. Thank you. Thank you so much, Amy. Now we're going to open up the floor for guests to ask any questions they may have for Amy. So feel free to type your questions in the chat or unmute yourself and ask any questions you may have. Just keep them coming and we'll answer them.
I see that we have some questions in the chat. So I see one of the questions from Zoe is, did you take inspiration from other authors when starting the writing process?
I actually, there is a book called, now I'm forgetting, 8 Dates, and it is a partnership book. So it's a like husband, wife, or, relationship book. And they have dates that you go on with your partner. And so that really inspired me of like, why don't we have dates with our parents? And so that was definitely an inspiration. And that was written by the Gottmans. They're a relationship therapist couple. And actually, I attended one of their workshops with my husband. And one of the things that they said stuck with me and really helped me in the process of writing this book about my parents, because they said, when you're in a relationship with someone and you're married, 10 years later, you think, oh, they're the same person, but actually you've been changing and they've been changing. And so do you wake up every day and be curious about who that person is and how they've changed? Right. And that made me start thinking about my own parents of, well, I still see them as the parents from when I was 10. And now it's been 30 years, right? Like they must have changed and they must be different. And who are they today? And so going into these conversations with this curiosity helped me a lot. And that was all from the Gottmans.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think it's honestly a really creative take on it to look at other works and thinking about different ways you can kind of play with that work. And kind of relatedly, Zoe asked two other questions that I related to what you just answered here. Do you have any book recommendations, and what is the writing process like?
I recommend my book, Unfinished Business. I mean, it depends on what type of book you're looking for. I've got a whole lot of books, a whole lot of recommendations on different things. So there are business books, personal development. So Zoe, if you can write like what types of books you're looking for, one of my favorites is Brene Brown's business books. There's a book called Essentialism, which is related to business and non-business stuff, but essentially the purpose behind that is if it is not a heck yeah, it should be a no. And this is in all of life, right? Business and what you pursue to personal things. Should you go to the party? Should you buy this shirt? Like if it is not a heck yeah, it should be a no is the mindset, because oftentimes we fill our plates with way too much. So, and then the other book is Start With Why. And that was another book that inspired me, right? Which is, why are you doing the thing you're doing? And too often we're thinking about how do I do it or what do I do? And instead of doing that, it start with why. Why are you doing it? And then that will keep you motivated as you do the what and the how. So
Those are some wonderful books. I've definitely heard about them myself because I often look at like, how do I manage my time better? And those are definitely two of those books that come up. And then if you could quickly talk about how your writing process is.
so when I first started these conversations, it wasn't meant to be a book. It was meant to be I'm just trying to see what my parents' life was like and really build that understanding and see what comes of it. And then there was this idea of, oh, like maybe this could become a book, because I started using my own process as I coached my clients through their own relationships with their parents. And so when I started writing the book, it was very messy. Let's just say that it was very messy. I had a lot of ideas. I didn't know how I wanted to structure the book. There was a thought of maybe I'll just write all of my stories and then write all of my parents, like, and it was honestly like a start, stop, and trying to figure out what would work. And at the end of the day, I ended up taking a class from Publish Your Purpose. Highly recommend it. And it's a book publishing class, because I also realized I don't know the entire publishing process, which it's everything from what kind of fonts do you want inside your book? What color do you want the paper, right? How do you want to lay out certain things? What's the cover going to look like, right? Like there's just all these things that I didn't think about. I'm like, paper, you have choice in color of paper? Yeah. And thickness of paper and, just all these things. And I'm like, oh, and so it was wonderful taking that class, because not only is there a focus on the writing and you have editors helping you to review and classmates that are on this process and this journey, but you also learn about the logistical things and the strategy behind writing the book. And the fact that, for example, you have to be talking about your book. As soon as you know you're writing a book, you start telling the world. Because if you're waiting till it's published to start telling people, it's kind of late in the process, right? You got to start telling the world.
Pretty sound advice. Going to a little bit more on the content of the book itself, we have some questions in the question and answer sort of chat function from Meghana. How do you feel like the model minority myth contributes to or perpetuates some of the themes that you talk about in your book?
So, I mean, I think one of the very first chapter, which is my success will never be good enough for my parents. And there is this notion of, oh, like we're supposed to be good at what we do and the best, and you've got to be 99%. And so that definitely fed into that myth. And just the pressures of feeling like I needed to thrive and to do well and to prove myself, and I'll also add this, part of the model minority myth is that we stay quiet. And growing up, I was taught that you stay quiet, don't be seen, don't be heard, just work really hard and you will thrive. And for those who have experienced corporate America, you know that that's not how the world works, right? You actually need to speak up. You actually need to self-promote the work you do. And actually, when I was at Google, you needed to nominate yourself for promotion. You had to say, hey, I'm good enough, and I want to nominate myself for promotion, which goes against what I was taught as a child. And so it was a learning journey in my corporate world and trying to reconcile the two things of what I was taught, what helps me succeed in corporate America, and talking to my parents about it. And one of the things that my parents shared was that, you know what, like, again, it's what I mentioned earlier. We taught you based on what we knew. When we came to America, we were taught that we should not be loud. We should not speak up, right? Otherwise, if we get noticed, we could get in trouble. And so that's what we taught you. But if now in corporate America, you need to speak up, then do that. Don't listen to what we said, because we might not be right.
Yeah, and I think that's sort of a good transition to this other question that Meghana asked in the chat. What is the best way in the moment to address small comments that parents may make to communicate their disappointment or disapproval, but that hurt you or build up over time?
I think the best way in the moment is so it depends. If you are triggered, then get grounded first, because if you're triggered, you're not going to be responding from a centered place, from an intentional place, and your emotions are going to speak for you. So like when I was having conversations with my parents and they triggered me, I would either go to the bathroom and just do what I needed, shake all the emotions off, or take deep breaths. And if what they said really, really, really triggered me, then I would just say, hey, let's reconvene another day, right? But not all conversations have to happen in the moment. And it could be that you go back later to address it. And it could be that you start with trying to understand, well, how come you're saying that? Or what makes you so disappointed, right? And it starts with that understanding of where they're coming from and why they're saying it. And then you could start sharing your perspective and how you felt about it. But always start with that understanding of where they're coming from. And don't ever feel the need to have that conversation right away if you're in a triggered state.
I think that's a really great tactic. I'm actually in a class right now for negotiations, and one of the things that they talk about is constantly like asking questions to understand, the other side more. And so I think it can be applicable to so many different things.
It is completely applicable. It is applicable not just with your parents, but in corporate America. If you're trying to influence someone, the best way to do it is to understand them first. Why are they saying the thing they're saying? Where are they coming from? What is their thought process, right? And when you start understanding them and they actually feel like you understand, they're going to be much more open to being influenced by you, because they're trusting you now. But if you start off with, I want to change you and persuade you, they're going to shut off, because, you know, how many of us want to be sold something or changed by someone?
Yeah, I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
I have another question here from Caroline. Did your parents feel that you captured their feelings or stories accurately?
Yeah. So I think so. And my dad has said, oh, they should turn this into a movie, you know, and I'm like, oh, thanks. So I do believe that they feel like it's been captured. I mean, there's so many stories that I couldn't put in the book, because my first draft was actually like 150% of what the size of the book is right now. And the book is 360 pages. So I couldn't put all of the stuff that I wanted to put in it, but I think I captured the most important elements. But there's so much more to their story.
Yeah, so a related question that we have in the chat that dropped in is that, so Jessica says, or Jess, I'm not sure if your parents have read your book yet, but while writing the book, how did you navigate telling your story authentically while knowing that they may be reading what you write?
That's a really good question. I think because it was this long journey, I'll be honest. So, I think it took me so long to actually get the book out there, and I said that it was a messy process because I could not figure out, how do I write this in a way that honors their story while also honoring my truth? Like, and what is that balance? And I started and stopped. I tried so many different formats. There are so many rough drafts of this book prior to what you see right now published. And that was something that I struggled with. How do I balance the two? And I think at the end of the day, that's why I split the book into the way it is. I have my story, which is my truth and how I see the world. And then I took the conversations that I had with my parents, and it actually reads like a conversation, right? And so I didn't change what they said. I just merely put it into a story format. And so I was able to share their truth while still sharing mine without it being kind of muddled. And that worked for me.
Yeah, it's a very clever and conscientious way of formatting it. I love how you did it because, like, as we talked about earlier, there's two different sides to every story, and there's so many different perspectives to take on it. So I think you did a really good job with that.
Thank you.
Last, or maybe not the last question, but another question we have in the chat is from Ellie. What's next for you?
I'm taking all of December off. I mean, writing the book was definitely, so for whoever is embarking on a journey of writing the book, it's definitely rewarding. And it is hard, right? So it required me, and I also have a kiddo who's 21 months. So I had to get up at 5 a.m. every day and write before he woke up. And then on weekends, I would write while my husband took care of him. And so I had that support, but it was a lot of work, and it felt like I just never had a break. And it just kept going, because after you write it, then you have editors reviewing it, and then you have another set of editors. So it's just this continuation for months and months and months. And so what's next for me? I am taking a break. That's definitely one. Another thing that I am exploring is doing a podcast. And I want to do a podcast to share stories of people who have been on this journey, who have come out on the other side and have a different sort of relationship with their parents. And it is because oftentimes I hear all these stories of people saying, oh, but my parents are different. You know, your parents, Amy, sure, you went on this journey and now you have a different relationship. But my parents will never do this. This will never work with my parents. So I want to be able to tell more stories, not just mine, to really inspire people that it is possible. And it's not just Amy that can do this, right? And then the other thing that I'm noodling over is, a lot of people have said, well, it feels very lonely and scary to do this alone. And it would be so cool to have just a support system. So I'm pondering creating like a group program or groups so that you feel less alone. It's like, oh, my parents responded in this way. Oh, me too, you know, and you feel this community and this support system. So those are two things that are top of mind for me of what I'm exploring.
Yeah, I hope you get that break soon. You really deserve it after doing all of this work and pouring it into it. But the podcast sounds amazing. I know if you definitely did one, we would definitely won't be interested in hearing more about it.
Yeah, thank you.
Do we have any more questions remaining from our audience today? If not, that's all right. I'm happy to hand things back over to Kelly.
Wow, you would have thought I would have learned to unmute after 2 years of Zoom. But thank you so much, Marika, and thank you so much for joining us again, Amy. And for everyone who hopped on this webinar to hear from her, I would like to now announce our 3 giveaway winners to receive a free ebook copy of Amy's latest book. Our winners are Justin Sobel, Kim Yang, and Caroline Cooksey. Congratulations. If you are one of our winners, please put your email address in the chat and we will connect with you to claim your prize. Thank you again for joining us in this conversation tonight, and we hope to see you at the next event. Go Terps!